This is a special presentation from the Brighton Central School District PTSA.
So welcome, I'm Jennifer Cassiopo. I'm one of the transition specialists with the Midwest Regional Special Education Technical Assistance Support Center, also known as the RSE TASC, Midwest being the Midwest region of New York State. So it's a mouthful, and thank you for bearing with me on that. I am part of a contract that is given or put out by the New York State Education Department, and it is funded through IDEA dollars. And our job is to provide professional development and technical assistance to the area school districts on the policies and regulations that guide special education delivery in schools. And so we're typically a resource for school personnel, but there are times that we are asked to do these types of things for parents. So I'm happy to be here with you, providing this information. The information I'm going to provide for you tonight is strictly from state ed. So I don't necessarily have information on how your district is implementing these regulations, but these are the requirements that are put out by state ed and that your district then has to take on and try to implement as best as they can for each student. But before we start, just by raise of hands, how many of you have a student in high school currently, so 9th through age 21? Okay, and so how many of them are in elementary? How many of you have somebody in elementary? Okay, so some of you are planners. And then middle school? Oh, lots of planners in the room, okay. So just so you know a little bit about me, I'm a special education teacher by trade. I taught for 12 years. I taught from preschool actually all the way up to high school. Moved around in a few different places and just kind of tried to find my niche in a specific grade level. I also have twins of my own that are 16, so I am in the middle of high school. They're juniors. There's a lot that goes into high school. Junior year, not fun. Just so you all know, if you're not there yet, hold on, it gets tough. And not just for the kids, but for us as parents, it gets tough. So you have this handout, and this is what I'm going to refer to as we go through the conversation. This will kind of be our home base as we work through the information. You have two other sheets behind that, and we will refer to those specifically. Please feel free to stop and ask questions if I'm not being clear, or if I went too fast. And if I use an acronym, please stop me. I try not to use them, or I try to explain them first, and then I'll use the acronym. But please make sure that if I am missing, or if you're missing something that I'm saying, please stop me, because otherwise, it's not useful for you in any way, shape, or form. So looking at this chart, we're going to start with our potential graduate over here on the far left-hand side. And when we're speaking about a diploma at this point, we're going to talk about the basics you need for just a Regents diploma. This is kind of the building blocks, the foundation that we're going to talk about. There are many diploma types. There are advanced diplomas and diplomas with honors and with different designations that we will not be speaking about tonight because, quite frankly, that's just too much information for one evening. So we're going to talk about the foundation of a Regents diploma. So in this green box, a student has to achieve or complete these credits. So when a student graduates high school, they have to have 22 credits, and they are designated in specific courses. So if you look in that box, it tells you how many they need in each of those course areas. So ELA needs 4, social studies needs 4, science 3, math 3, and it continues on. So just know that there is a specific delineation of the 22 credits that a student must complete. The only thing that there's some flexibility in is the language other than English requirement. They have to have 1 credit in language other than English, but some of our students are exempt from that. If a student is exempt from the language other than English, which is noted as LOTE on your graphic, they would have to complete a credit in something else, maybe an art, a music, some other type of elective. So they do have to still have 22. They're just exempt from that language other than English. The other thing I want to make sure you're understanding is when we're talking about these 22 credits, we are talking about students who are being instructed in the gen ed curriculum. There is a very small population of our students that have more severe disabilities. They are instructed and assessed in the New York State Alternate Assessment. That's that light green box at the bottom. If a student is instructed and assessed using the New York State Alternate Assessment, they have an outcome already, and that's way over here. It's called the Skills Credential, the Skills and Achievement Commencement Credential. So know that if the student is in that New York State Alternate Assessment, their outcome is the Skills Credential. They do not have to do any of the pieces at the top. They have a more prescribed curriculum and instruction that they're using that's much more individualized for those students. So back up to the top. Once or while your student is completing their 22 credits, they also have assessment requirements that they have to complete. So the 4 red circles are the Regents exams that they have to complete in the core areas. So they have,
So these are 22 unit credits. Are they taken in high school?
Yep. Yes, thank you for asking that. 4 or 5 or 6, it depends on how long the student needs to, in order to complete them. So I will say typically our school trajectory is that a student would enter 9th grade, spend 4 years in high school, and graduate after those 4 years as a senior, typically around the age of 18. Any student can stay in school until they're 21 if they have not completed all of these requirements and have reached their diploma. So a student's school career ends either when they complete the requirements for their diploma or when they reach the age of 21, whichever comes first. Okay, so thank you for asking that question. That was a great clarifying question. So we have our 4 red circles, which represent the 4 core Regents exams that they must take. ELA, they must take a math, they must take a science, and they must take a social studies. So those are already set, that you have to have one in all those areas. And ELA only has 1 exam. So just know that. There are multiple sciences they could utilize, there are multiple math, and there are a couple of social studies that they could utilize. But ELA, you have 1 choice, and it's usually taken in their junior year. The Regents exam is usually taken in the junior year. So New York State, the education department has now created different pathways a student could utilize to graduate. So we have our 4 Regents exams. Now they have to have 1 more exam or assessment. And the student has choices. So a student could either choose another Regents exam in their strength area. So maybe they're a strong math student, they can take another math. Maybe they enjoy social studies, so they can take another social studies. Those are denoted in the red rectangles. There are also pathway assessments that the State Ed Department is in the process of approving. There are some already that are approved, and they are typically AP exams, so the advanced placement exams that go with the advanced placement courses. And sometimes they are in the career and technical education coursework as well. There are some exams. Again, there's not a lot of them yet because there's an approval process that the State Ed Department is working through. But the goal is that there would be an exam in other areas such as humanities, arts, language other than English, and the career and technical education portion. Or a student could complete the career and development Career Development and Occupational Studies Commencement Credential, also known as the CDOS Credential. And we have more information on that later. But they have to complete that 5th
So
assessment.
these boxes, they're exams? Is that
Mhm.
okay?
Yep, and they only need to do one for the basic Regents diploma. They just have to complete one. Yep.
You said there are options for the Regents exams in math, science, and social studies.
Correct.
Is the global Regents not the required social studies anymore?
Correct. Right, thank you. Breathe that
Yes.
sigh of relief. So I hope everybody heard that question. You know, the question was, is the global not the required social studies Regents exam? And it is not.
What is global?
Oh, there's a course, oh geez, does anybody know the
No.
full name? Global Studies.
Global studies and
Global-
geography. It's
Yes.
global geography, yeah.
So that's a
Global
social studies
geography and
course, and there's an exam at the end of it, and we all call it the global exam. It's a social studies exam. It's a tough exam. Students struggle with it. And it used to be required that you had to pass that global exam, but you no longer have to have that global exam. In my personal opinion, I think a student should attempt it, because if you pass it, fantastic. You know, you already have that. But if you can pass the U.S. history exam, use that one, right? If the global exam is standing in your way. So yes, they need at least one of those 2 exams.
Could you go with that
Absolutely.
pathway option again?
Yep.
That column?
Mm-hmm. So these exams, the red ones are Regents exams. And these are not the formal names, just so you know, but it's, you know, the topic area. The blue represent potential pathway assessments. Not every pathway has, so a pathway is something outside of the Regents exams. So the New York State Education Department recognized that not every student,
Does it mean that you don't have Regents exams in those subjects?
right, that's correct. So these would be other assessments. But SED, or the State Ed Department, doesn't have a lot of them yet. They're in the process of approving them. If you're curious as to what is approved, if you go to the New York State Education Department website, you can find a list of the approved exams. And like I said, at this point, they're advanced placement exams and international baccalaureate exams, so AP and IB. So they're high-level exams at this point. Other questions about the pathway piece? So we have to, the student is working on completing the 22 credits and these 4 exams plus one of these assessments. Once they've completed those things,
So it doesn't
They
have to
can
be
receive-
another Regents.
no, it doesn't. Once they've completed those things, they would be eligible to receive a Regents diploma.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
She said, so they don't have to take a 5th Regents. No, they don't. They could take a pathway assessment represented in blue or complete the CDOS credential represented in that green
And still get a Regents?
and still get a Regents. Yep.
What does the word Regents mean?
That's a great question also. So our state ed department is overseen by a board of regents, and the exams that they've created have taken on that name, Regents. I will tell you, New York State is, I believe, the only state that has the Regents exams. And we're the only state that has something called the Regents Diploma. Most states call it a high school diploma. So once you leave New York State, if you said you had a Regents Diploma, people most likely would not know what you were talking about. They would want to know if you had a high school diploma. So just know that we in New York use that term all the time. We talk about a Regents Diploma, but it's not necessarily known across the nation what a Regents Diploma is. It's a high school diploma. So thank you for asking that. So are you understanding that pathway, the 22 credits, the 4 Regents exams, and then another assessment, whether it be a Regents exam, a pathway assessment, or the CDOS credential? That's the basic level of what a student needs to do in order to receive that Regents high school diploma. there is all this stuff in the middle that I did not address yet. So because we have the Regents exams, and they can be difficult for some students.
Sorry, just before you move to the middle.
Yep, thank you.
Can you just give me an example of how long a Regents exam is, and do typically students attempt one every single year, or more towards the end of when they're graduating, or how do they pace out how they prepare for these exams?
So they don't necessarily take all of them every year.
Okay.
So once a student completes a course, so I can use my own children as an example. As freshmen, they completed the algebra course. At the end of the course, at the end of the year, they took the algebra Regents exam.
Okay.
As sophomores, they took geometry. After they completed the geometry course, they took the geometry exam for math.
Okay, and then, I mean, I have an overachieving child who
Me too.
will, and then I have an underachieving child, then I have a middle achieving child.
Perfect.
For my older achieving child, if he cared about his scores a lot, would he take one math and then take another math, and the grade that is better count, or he's only allowed to take one? Or they can take as many Regents exams?
They can take as many Regents
Okay.
exams as they would like, provided that they've completed the coursework
Right.
prior to that Regents exam.
Okay, thank you.
And they're somewhat spaced out. I will say junior year is a tough year. There's several exams at the end of junior year for whatever reason. It just kind of happened that way, I guess. So the junior year is typically when they take the ELA exam. They'll usually take a math, they have a science, and a social studies. So they have usually at least 4 exams at the end of their junior year. So just know that going in. Junior year can be a very heavy year.
So they will have Regents exam all 4 years.
But they might not have 4 Regents exams all 4 years. Freshman year might be 1 or 2. Sophomore year might be 2 or 3. It depends on how your student's educational program has been structured. You know, and some kids are put on advanced placement, so they start in 8th grade working through that coursework and they can complete some Regents exams then. And then they're ahead of the game a little bit. Or some kids, depending on their needs, might be put on a program where they have some courses broken up into 2 years. So maybe algebra is broken up into 2 years. So it wouldn't be until their sophomore year that they're taking the algebra assessment. The nice thing is that we have some flexibility for our students depending on what their needs are.
So you said like for math, you need to take 1 Regents exam, so it can be on any subjects, either algebra or geometry or whatever.
Right. Yes, they need to have 1 passing Regents exam, but they're often given the opportunity to attempt more than that. Go ahead, Carol.
This sounds really, really complicated.
It is.
Typically, our Brighton students are taking many more than 4 Regents exams. And there's the Regents exam is also the final exam in many courses. So even though you already have your algebra Regents exam, you may be taking geometry. The Regents is the final exam in that course. So you will also take that Regents exam. Does that make sense? So typically, you are going to take many more than 4 exams throughout your high school 4 years.
So if we're reading this right, but the ELA is kind of the big one that needs to be out of the 4 key ones. The ELA is junior year, and that's the other.
There's just no other choice.
Right. Yeah.
That's
but the other ones, you're going to have.
You have some choice.
You're going to have some, okay. Yeah.
You have some opportunity. If I'm not great in algebra, but maybe I'm good in
In
geometry.
right.
great.
Yeah. So it's okay.
But yeah,
ELA
ELA
is the one. Okay.
We have 1.
Yep.
Does that make
So
sense?
the exams are tied to the courses themselves, right?
Yes.
Do we need to, does the kid need to register for them, or they're just given the exam and they take it then?
If they are registered in the course, they would be registered for the exam.
Automatically, okay.
So how will the diploma honor the scores? Like they will pick the best out of
Exactly.
they attend, or how does that?
That's a good question. So
All the
yes,
scores
it-
are going to be listed on their transcript. Okay, so if you take 7 Regents exams, they're all going to be listed.
Okay.
Your diploma is not dependent on the score the Regents diploma will not list the scores
Then how would you get Regents with honors and Regents with advanced designation?
based on your transcript. Everything will be listed on the transcript, and that all has to be determined with the school counselor as to what they qualify for.
Right, so the only one that does base it on scores is Regents with honors. You do have to have, I think it's 90, a computed score of 90 for all of the Regents exams. But that's the only one that depends on, that diploma, you must receive those 90s. The rest of them, we're assuming the passing grade is a 65. But then we're gonna talk about all of these things that give us some leeway on that 65.
So if you graduate from high school and you're going to apply for a job, they're going to ask you if you graduated. In New York State, they may ask about a Regents diploma, but they're not going to ask you anything about what you got on your Regents. If you are applying for specific jobs or you're going to college, they're going to get your transcript that's going to list every score, regardless of the amount of tests that you took. They're all going to be listed.
So can the student opt out of Regents if we don't?
That's a good question. You cannot opt out of the 4 requirements. The 4 required Regents
Can they just
exams.
take 4 and opt out of the rest?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm going to guess the answer is no, because it is the final exam in many courses. Yeah.
And some of that depends on your school board policy, so you would need to look into that. Every school board can change their policy about the Regents exams being a final grade or being calculated into their final grade. Sometimes, some districts have it as a standalone grade, some don't. It's different across the state because the local board has that ability to choose how they want to.
Sorry, so technically, their scores in high school are dependent on this final Regents exam, which will determine their transcripts. Meaning that their coursework throughout a science class, say, in the end, will not appear on the transcript. Like, there's no Regent score in a classroom score.
There is a Regent score.
There's a Regent score and a classroom
Regents-
score.
The final exam score,
Right.
and then their final grade, it would be listed also for that course.
And
On
the
a
reg-
transcript.
Right, yeah.
And then it gets, the Regents would then be averaged in for that overall score.
Depending on the class and how that class decides to use that as part of their final score. For instance, we have some exceptions to this, but most of the time, you may pass the course, but if you don't pass the exam, you don't pass the course, and you have to retake that course. I mean, it may have looked like you were passing the course, and then you fail the exam, and so then we have you retake the course if you have failed the exam. There are exceptions to that, when, there are principal exceptions to that, but that is the basic guideline here in Brighton. Different districts do it very differently.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so are you ready to move into what all of these arrows mean? Okay, so these are some exceptions. Remember I said that a passing score on a Regents exam is a 65. And typically, and Carolyn, I don't know if it's different in Brighton, but a passing grade for a course is also 65. Does that stand here? Okay. So keep 65 in your head. So minimum passing score is 65 to achieve, each of your credits and to pass an exam. So the state ed department has recognized that sometimes students need some exceptions to that rule about a 65. And so I'm going to have you flip to your second page because it addresses those 2 arrows in the middle of the graphic that we were just looking at. So I want you to have this one in front of you that starts with safety net. So there are a couple of safety net options for our students with disabilities. And the first, I'm actually going to pretty much use this verbatim because it spells it out so very nicely. The first is the compensatory option. And the students that are eligible to utilize the compensatory option are our students that are designated under the IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, That means they have an IEP, an individualized education program. Students that have a 504 plan under the Americans with Disabilities Act can also use this. And students who were once classified under IDEA but are now declassified, and they were declassified in grade 8 or thereafter, can also use this compensatory option. So what this compensatory option says is that if a student with a disability has taken their ELA exam and their math exam, and they've received a minimum score of 55 on those 2 exams, and then they've taken some other exams and have not done as well, have maybe scored a 45 to a 54, and we're going to use that Global Regents exam as our example, because that one is a stumbling block for some of our students. So if they receive a low score of a 45 on their Global Regents exam, but have received a 65 on some other Regents exam, the 65 can compensate for that low score of 45, and that 45 is then considered a pass. I love that face. Thank you so very much. It is so very confusing. I feel so awful for some of your school counselors that have to pay attention to all of this. So know that that 45 is then considered a pass, but that 45 stays on your transcript. Okay, so it doesn't change the score. It's just an ability for the school to say, we're going to consider this a pass. A student can do that for up to 2 exams. So if I have 2 65s somewhere, and I have 2 45s to 54s on another exam, or 2 other exams, I can use those to compensate, and they're considered passes.
So when you say a student can use those, does the student have a choice, or is this something that the school applies, or a rule that the school applies?
It's a great question. And I'm so glad you stood up. I'm like, so how do you address it here at Brighton?
I think we are trying to look at all the options to help our students leave Brighton with a high school diploma. So if that student is having trouble passing some of these exams, this is certainly a conversation we could have with your family to say, we can do this, or do you want to re-challenge these exams?
Right.
Because you can always take the exams again, but this is an option.
And if taking the exam would require to take the course?
They would not necessarily have to retake the course, no. If they wanted to just retake, if they passed the course and wanted just to retake the exam.
So will the number of attempts be displayed on the transcript?
That I don't know.
The number of attempts on the exam, what did you ask?
Is it on the transcript?
I believe so, but I think that's also within local control. You can say, yes, we're going to put it on, or nope, we're not even putting that attempt on. So I'm not sure. You would have to look into that in your board policies to see if it stands on there.
So you can take, if you fail the first reading exam, so you can take the same like English, you can take one time. If you like until you pass.
Correct.
Yes, they're given, many of the exams are given in January, June, and August.
Oh.
So many times when the kids, if somebody fails an exam in June, they may go to summer school to review, they may get a tutor to review, they may review on their own, and then retake the exam in August. In that case, and somebody asked about signing up for the exam, in that case, if your child was receiving private tutoring or you were working with them at home, you would need to notify us so we would order the exam. Summer school students, we're going to order the exams automatically, but we would do that for you.
So you can compensate for another score, that's not including the math and English though, right?
It's a good question. So math and English, you have to have a 55.
Okay.
That's the lowest you can get on those 2. And I say that, and then in my head, I'm like, well, there's something else, and we'll talk about that afterward. But it gets complicated, right? There's a lot to pay attention to with this.
If a family feels, and you're watching your child and they're struggling, and you're wondering, oh my gosh, are they going to be able to get through those 4 exams? Are they going to be able to do this? I would definitely make an appointment with your school counselor to say, okay, let's talk about what the different options are for my child. Because as you can see, it's very, very individualized.
It is.
Most students will graduate by passing those 4 exams. But sometimes it gets a little more complicated.
I'm not familiar with the scoring system. 55 is 55% percentile, 55 out of what?
Percent.
55%.
I say percent, and then I just know that there is a curve on some of the exams. But they're looking for that score of 55%. Okay? So if a student uses this compensatory option, and you know, it's been decided, yep, the student is done taking the exams, we're going to use this, we're going to apply the provisions of the compensatory option, a student would receive a local high school diploma. There's lots of conversation about, you know, is a local diploma as good as a Regents diploma? A local diploma will do the same things for a student that a Regents diploma will. You know, you can say, yes, I have a high school diploma. It can help you gain employment. You can attend college with a local diploma, and you can gain entry into the military with a local diploma. So know that if they have a local diploma, it's good. It's a good thing. We want them to have that high school diploma. Years ago, like back when I was in high school in the 80s, everybody got a local diploma, unless you worked to have a Regents diploma, which had different requirements. And then they flipped it and said, nope, everybody's getting a Regents diploma. Now maybe you get a local diploma, you know, because you used a different provision. So just know, a local diploma is a high school diploma, just like a Regents diploma. It's a high school diploma, okay? So just keep that, you know, in your mind. Again, those scores don't change on the transcript. They stand. So, you know, if there was a 45, it would be on that transcript. The second safety net option is the low pass option for our students with disabilities. Again, it's the same criteria. So a student would need to be classified under IDEA and have an individualized education program. Or they could be a student with a 504 plan, or they could be declassified in grade 8 or thereafter. What the low pass option does is it allows flexibility in what's considered passing. So for the low pass, a 55 to a 64 is the low pass. If a student uses this on 1 or more exams, then they would receive the local diploma. And again, their exam scores stand on their transcript. If they got a 55, that's what goes on the transcript. That one's actually pretty straightforward. If you're using 55 as your pass score, then you can have your diploma.
So this option, does it have to be determined before the kid takes the exam or after?
Thankfully, no. You don't have to determine it before. So basically, we allow the students to attempt and do whatever it is that they can do, and we can apply these as the student moves through. Other questions about that low pass?
Just a quick question. So IDEA is the same as an IEP?
Right, so IDEA is the federal guidelines for a student to be
As an
classified
IEP.
and have an IEP.
Okay.
Individualized education program. It provides special education services for a student. Okay. Other questions? Okay. So I'm actually going to ask you to flip that sheet over. We'll get back to the superintendent's determination in a few minutes. So I want you to be looking at the side with the red banner on it. These are the appeals to graduate with a lower score on Regents exams. So we know we have safety net options specifically for our students with disabilities. But we also have an option for students who maybe do not have an identified disability. And that is called the appeal of the Regents exam, in that first box. So any student can utilize the appeal for the Regents exam score. So this says that if a student takes an exam twice, so remember we said that they could take them multiple times. If they've taken an exam twice and have not passed, but have come or have scored between a 60 and a 64 at least once on the exam, a student can ask for an appeal of that grade. A parent could ask for that appeal to happen, a teacher could ask for that appeal to happen, a counselor, somebody can, it doesn't have to be the student asking, but somebody needs to say to the principal, I would like, or we would like to have an appeal of this exam score.
What does that mean, appeal?
So I'll tell you what would happen. So the principal then has to convene a committee of themselves, another administrator, and 3 teachers. The teacher of the course that's connected to the exam cannot be a part of that committee. But they would look at some information. They would look at how the student performed in the course. And they would also look at what extra instruction the student engaged in. So did they come after school for some extra help? Did they have a tutor for extra help? Did they utilize special education services for some extra academic help with that course? If it's decided that the student has done that, then the principal and the committee can say, yep, we're going to consider that 60 or that 61 a pass. It's okay, we accept it, that's a pass. The grade would stand on the transcript, so it would stay the same. A student can do this for one Regents exam and still receive a Regents diploma. Or they can do it for 2 exams and receive a local diploma. Again, a diploma is a diploma, so we're happy with whichever diploma it is that they receive. This just is a bit of a waiver again for that score. So if you have a student who has a particular struggle in a subject area, this appeal can really be helpful for our students. And again, that's for any student who would like to use that. Then we have something called the low pass appeal. That's the next one down right. I wish you were on camera so you could see all the faces that I see. This is great. Yeah. So we have the low pass appeal. Remember we had the low pass safety net option that said I could get a 55 on an exam to a 64. Well, now we have the low pass appeal. So this is only for our students with disabilities that are designated under IDEA or 504 or have been declassified in grade 8 or thereafter. If that student receives a 55, or excuse me, lower than a 55, so if they receive a 52 to a 54 on an exam that they've taken twice, they can ask for that to be appealed to be considered a passing score of 55. So they can do this for up to 2 exams, and they would receive their local diploma. So not to complicate things too much further, but remember the compensatory option where the student had to receive a 55 on the ELA and math? Well, now they can get a 52 to a 54 if they appeal those scores. So if they weren't able to get the 55 but they came really close, they can appeal that score.
But they will have to take the exam twice.
Twice, yes. The last one is for our English language learners. And these are for our English language learners who entered the U.S. in grade 9 or after. This allows for some flexibility on the ELA exam. So same rules apply. They have to take it twice, the ELA exam. And if during their 2 attempts, one of them, they score between a 55 and a 59, they can appeal that score and ask for that to be considered a pass for the ELA exam only. They can utilize the other appeal, the one at the top, for other exams, but this allows some flexibility with the ELA exam. Same thing, all those same rules apply. Use it for up to 2 exams between this appeal and the regular appeal, and they would receive the local diploma. So, those are some other nice options for our students. We are trying to provide many provisions for our students to receive a diploma. It's been noted, obviously, that sometimes the Regents exams get in the way. And so we're trying to alleviate that a little bit for our students. what questions do you still have about the safety net options? I just threw a ton of information at you. It's a lot to digest.
You said some of the exams were bell curve for percentile?
Yes, but I couldn't tell you all of the bell curve and
Is
all of
that
that.
on a state or a local
Oh,
level?
yeah, state.
Okay, so our low-performing students are gonna get pushed into even lower scores?
Well, the goal is to have more kids pass the exam with that curve. It's not a bell curve necessarily, it's just a curve. So, and I'm not necessarily educated, I suppose, on all of those curves. I don't know if you would be.
Because all I can tell you is it's different every year.
It is.
Based on the students who have taken the exam.
Yeah.
Based on how hard the state thought the exam was. There's just all these different factors that the state takes into account.
Yeah.
And for some of the exams, then they create this curve. We really don't, then they tell us how to score based on that. And usually, I will tell you that, not usually, always, the curve is giving kids more leeway. So you have to get less questions right in order to get to that 65.
Right.
It's always in the children's favor.
It is. Thanks, Liz. Thank you.
So the exam is written by the state?
Say that again.
The exam is written by the state?
Is written by the state, yes.
Okay. And it's the same exam all over?
For the whole state, yes.
Okay.
Good question. Other ones?
How much time do they get on a Regents exam?
How much time do they get on a Regents exam? I think it's 3 hours. And then if your student has extended time, they can use that, if it's documented that, you know, that the student needs extended time, they can use that on the Regents exam. Okay?
And how many questions?
Oh, I don't know. It changes all the time. Changes with each iteration of the Regents exam.
You can get practice, they do a lot of practice exams. I mean, you could go to Barnes & Noble, get a practice exam book, they're online. So if you want to see the full tests, they're all available.
How do they get extended time?
Utilizing the IEP or the 504 or the D class, right? They can, if your student needs some test modifications, so if they needed the extended time or maybe a quieter location, that's something that the Committee on Special Education would help to determine for that student, and they can utilize that then for the Regents exams. They would also utilize that throughout the year for other tests as well as needed.
So the students have to go and ask for extended time? Or?
The Committee on Special Education would determine that. And yes, with the student present, hopefully, you know, the student would be a part of that decision making.
Are the exams, are they given during the special time during the course of the year, or is it done on the weekends, or?
No, it's usually at the end of the year.
Okay.
There is about a week and a half set aside, and each exam is scheduled for a certain day and certain time. And that's given to students so that they know when to show up for their exam.
So everybody in the whole state takes the exam at the same time.
Right. Right, that's not determined by your local district, that's determined by the state education department.
So that means all districts get the same questions?
You got it. All districts have the same exam at the same time.
Then they will know the date and time, exam date and time.
Do you know how that's shared with students and families?
Yeah, well, it's already determined. I mean, that would probably already be on our website or be on the state education website. The finals week is already determined for next year, actually.
Okay. So 1 year before they will.
And students, I'm sure, are given that information in class as well, you know, so that they know when to show up. And there are some exams, you asked when, there are some exams that are given in January as well. But again, your student would know if they were supposed to come in for their exam.
I have one more question.
Sure.
The course itself, it spans through the year or through the semester?
Past, usually.
No, spans. So for
Oh,
example,
it's
the science course, is
Yes.
it just based on semester or the whole year?
Most of our classes are full year. We do have exceptions to that. In our alternative high school program, we have courses that actually are given in one semester with the exam. Right, well, global studies, well, the exam's only the one-year exam now.
Right, but it's on both years of the content.
Not
anymore.
Okay, well.
No, it's only
sorry.
learning of the content. So generally, it's a full-year course with a test at the end. What Cindy was saying, we used to have it was a 2-year course with a test at the end, but the state has thankfully changed that to the test is just on the 10th grade curriculum now. They don't have to have the 2 years test at the end of it. School is really, really hard if you haven't figured that out yet.
It's really hard. Other questions? Okay, we have just a couple more pieces of information that I want to make sure you leave with. So if you'll flip to this blue page, this is information on the Career Development and Occupational Studies Commencement Credential. So this is another way, another way that the student can use to meet the requirement of the 5 assessments to receive their diploma. But this is not an assessment. This is a series of different activities that the student would have to engage in. So let me just tell you what those requirements are for the Career Development and Occupational Studies Commencement Credential. So there are 2 ways a student can achieve this. It's also known as the CDOS credential. The first is option 1. And for option 1, a student would need to have a career plan developed over the span of their educational career. So it would start typically in 9th grade and be revisited and updated each year. And that's not something that they do by themselves. That would be done with staff members that are familiar with the student. So typically it could be a special education teacher. It could be a career counselor if your school has one. It could be the school counselor. So somebody that's familiar with the student and their goals. The student has to demonstrate a level of achievement at the commencement level of the CDOS standards. So there are a specific set of standards that they would have to show that they have mastered. They would also need to engage in career and technical education coursework, also known as CTE coursework, and or work-based learning experiences. And there's a certain number of hours that they would need to include or need to complete for each of those things, whether they're in a combination or individual. So the number is 216. So if they are only doing work-based learning hours, they would need 200 work-based learning hours. If they're completing CTE coursework, they could do up to 2 units of credit in CTE coursework with 54 hours of work-based learning. And then there needs to be an employability profile completed with the student, and that's a measurement or an assessment of their work skills, really is what that is. So that's option 1. Or option 2, the student would have to meet the requirements for a nationally recognized work readiness credential. And there are about 4, I think there's 4 that the State Ed Department has approved. And these are credentials or work readiness credentials that are known nationally. So it's not specific to our region, it's across the nation that utilize these exams or these assessments. If the student is able to complete these things, they can use this CDOS credential as their 5th requirement, their 5th assessment requirement for their diploma. So know that if you have a student who maybe is not performing well on assessments, there's potential that they could utilize the CDOS credential if it's built into their school programming. But this is a conversation to have with the school counselor to see, is the student are we able to program for this? So keep that in mind if you have a student that is struggling with those assessment criteria. So we need to go back to the superintendent's determinations. The superintendent's determination is fairly new. It was initially put out in one iteration, and it's morphing as it goes. So we are in the third update or new version of the superintendent's determination. And things are changing very fast with the state education department. So please know that your school district is trying to keep up with all of the changes that are put out by the state ed department, and this is one of them. So this superintendent's determination of graduation with a local diploma is only for our students who have an IEP, or an individualized education program. And this says that a student that has an IEP, in order to be granted that diploma, they need to complete the 22 units of credit. But if they are struggling with those assessments and are unable to pass those assessments, but they have worked toward and achieved the CDOS credential, the superintendent could award them a local diploma. But the parent has to ask for that to happen. So they can't just give it to the student and say, you're done with school. The parent has to say, could you please review my student's records and determine if they can receive this local diploma without passing those assessments. The other way they can receive this, so there's multiple ways, is if they were successful on the ELA and math and passed that with a 55, but were unable to pass the rest of the assessments, they could also utilize the the superintendent's determination for a local diploma. They should be attempting though those assessments. Even if we're thinking that maybe we're going to use the superintendent's determination, they should be attempting the assessments. So we should be providing them the access to that curriculum and then access to that exam. Okay, so that's the last way. Do you have a question?
Yeah, when you get a local diploma, does it say all of this stuff on it? It's just a local diploma versus a local diploma with a superintendent determination?
Right, yes, it would not denote that it was under the superintendent's determination. It was a great question, thank you. Other questions on all of that information that I just threw at you? There is one thing on the back. If you are a parent that has a student in the New York State alternate assessment, that means that their requirement for graduation doesn't entail all that other stuff we just spoke about. There is information on that skills and achievement commencement credential. And this credential also denotes the student's work skills or their employability skills and their independence in demonstrating those skills. So please know that there is this credential for our students in the New York State alternate assessment. They would still be receiving instruction using the career development and occupational studies skills and standards. And then their work skills and their independence in those work skills is documented on the student exit summary, which is an extensive summary that lists out each of those skills and then the student's independence level and some comments that help to support the information that's designated on that student exit summary. Okay?
I have a question. At what point do you decide if the child is ready for trying to attempt the exams or has to do an alternative career?
That's hard to say because it's really an individualized process and decision. So it's important to be working closely with the Committee on Special Education to, look at your student in terms of, number one, do they qualify to be in the New York State alternate assessment? There are specific criteria that need to be in place or evident of that for that student. And then if they are eligible, is it the right time? That really is a tough decision sometimes depending on who our student is. And it's not one to be taken lightly. So I can't answer just because it's so highly individualized.
We have a lot of, we do have students who kind of cross over between the skills and achievement credential and the CDOS. So if you have not been an alternative assessment student up until high school and you want to challenge some high school courses and that goes well, that's great. If that doesn't go well, we can change course. We usually really start having conversations for kids that aren't as clear, you know, in the end of 9th and 10th grade is when families are saying, okay, I'm not sure this is going to work out for my child. What are my other options?
For the certificates or credentials that are not considered regular high school diplomas, who looks at them later? Like, what are they utilized for?
So for the CDOS credential,
And
actually both of them, employers would be interested to see those things and to see the documentation that goes with it. So the student exit summary for the skills credential, and then the employability profile for the CDOS credential, because those address the students' employability skills and their independence in those skills. For students who are in the New York State alternate assessment, these are also students who are typically connected to the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities. And it's called OPWDD also, just so you know if I flip back and forth. They use that information from the student exit summary to determine what types of supports the student needs in all of their activities. So not just work, but in their independent living skills and their utilization of the community as well. So for our students in the New York State alternate assessment, that student exit summary is very important because it does help with services down the line. Other questions?
So the CDOS
Mm-hmm.
program, is it available only for students that cannot take the Regents exam or?
Nope, it's available for all students.
Which one?
The CDOS credential.
Oh.
Yeah.
So that means like they can enroll themselves in this program and also do the Regents too?
Yes, but it is 216 additional hours of work, study, credit, or internship. And we have an internship coordinator available to all of our students.
So when you say work, study, or internship, 216 hours? During the school hours or how?
It doesn't have to be, it has to be coordinated by the school, but not necessarily during school day.
So it's after school
Right.
hours?
Could be.
And again, this is more individualized also, so that would be something that a student would probably need to say to their counselor, I would like to take part, or I'd like to try to work toward the CDOS credential. And then that can be coordinated, right? Because it is typically above and beyond some of your other coursework. So it's additional programming that would have to happen for a student at this point. Other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a special presentation from the Brighton Central School District's PTSA.